Okay, everybody, and of course, good morning to you as we welcome you to Exploring Buddhist Concepts right here on New Era TT Radio. And of course, normally we are joined in between here by Kasi Senghor. But Cassie is out today, and we have one of the other presenters in for Cassie today. So let me say good morning and welcome to Graham, who's doing our feature today. So, Graham, good morning to you. How are you doing?
Good morning, Sir Charles. Are you hearing me okay?
I'm hearing you very well so far. How are you doing?
Per-
Everything is good?
Perfect. Everything is very good, and I hope it is the same with you.
Yes, it is. I can't complain.
So, I thought that today I would talk to your listeners about a little bit about the life of the Buddha. I'm not sure that Cassie has covered that before. I hope he hasn't, because then I might be repeating myself. But I just, rather than talk about Buddhist teachings, which I think has been pretty much a flavor of the show for many weeks, I want to just give a little historical account about the Buddha himself, who this individual was, and a little bit about his life story. Yeah, so that's what I think I'll talk about over the next
No
half hour.
problem. Well, it's all yours from here on in. So you go ahead. I'll just be listening in.
Yeah. Okay, well, good morning, listeners, and thank you for tuning in to Mr. Senghor's regular Exploring Buddhist Concepts show. My name is Graham, as Sir Charles said. I'm standing in for Mr. Senghor this morning, and as I've just said, I'm going to cover a little bit of history about the life of the Buddha himself so that listeners can get an idea of who this individual was, know a little of his backstory. I'm not going to go into his teachings, I'm just going to delve a little into the history. So let's begin. First of all, I would tell you that his name was actually Siddhartha Gautama. He's the person that we refer to when we talk about the Buddha. That was his name. The Buddha is actually an honorific term that is given to a fully enlightened being. But his real name was Siddhartha Gautama, and his life, since it was a long, long time ago, is shrouded in legend and myth because this great movement built up around him. There are many, many stories that have evolved about what he did during his life, and some of them maybe you take with a grain of salt. Some of them are allegorical in the sense that they're trying to refer to things that he exemplified in his teachings, but we'll get into that as we go ahead. Most historians believe there actually was such a person. All right, so that is our starting point. There was a person called Siddhartha Gautama, and although the facts about his life have evolved over time, most of the facts began their life in an epic poem called Buddha Karita, which is written by a poet called Ashvaghosha in the 2nd century AD. So about 400, 500 years after the Buddha lived. A lot of facts about his life were inscribed in this poem, and the poem was written 2,000 years ago. So, according to the poem and the other historical accounts that we have, the future Buddha, the Buddha to be, Siddhartha Gautama, he first of all he was a man. Let's get this straight. He was not a divine being. He was a human being. He was not a god. He was a regular human being. And he was born in the 5th or 6th century BC in a place called Lumbini, which is in modern day Nepal on the northern Indian border. Siddhartha itself is a Sanskrit name, meaning one who has accomplished a goal, and Gautama is a family name. He was born into very luxurious circumstances. His father, who was called King Suddhodana, was leader of a large clan called the Shakya clan, a tribe, if you like. And it's not clear from the earliest texts whether Suddhodana was a hereditary king or he was more of a tribal chief. It's hard to understand which it might have been. And it's also possible that he might have been elected to that status rather than inheriting it. Nevertheless, though, he was very much a leader of the area in which he lived, this king, and he married two sisters, we're told. One was called Maya, and the other was called Pajatapati, Gautami. And they are said to have been princesses from another neighboring clan called the Koliya, again, in what is today northern India. Maya was the mother of Siddhartha, and he was her only child, and we are told that she died shortly after he was born. Her sister, Pajapati, who later became the first Buddhist nun, she actually raised the infant Siddhartha as her own child. We've learned that Siddhartha and his family were of the Kshatriya caste of warriors and nobles, very well regarded, high caste among their countrymen. And we're told that among his Siddhartha's more well-known relatives was his cousin Ananda, who would later become his chief disciple and personal attendant. But we're also told that Ananda was much younger than him, so he wouldn't have known them as a child. When Siddhartha was a few days old, it is said, a holy man came to examine the prince and give a prophecy of his future. And there are other differing accounts which say it was 9 Brahman holy men who made the prophecy. But whether it was 1 or whether it was a 9, whichever is true, they foretold that the boy would become either a great ruler or a great spiritual leader. And that troubled Prince Siddhartha's father, King Suddhodana, greatly. He himself was a great ruler, and he expected nothing else of his son. So the idea that his son might have become a great spiritual teacher was something that he didn't want at all. So we're told repeatedly that throughout the boy's early life, King Suddhodana did everything in his power to steer him in the direction of becoming a great ruler rather than a great spiritual teacher. So, for example, he was trained to become a fine archer, a great warrior. He was skilled in battle because he was heavily trained as a child. And generally, besides all that training to be a ruler, because he was the son of a king, he was raised in great luxury, and his father shielded him from any possible knowledge of religion or human suffering. And so Siddhartha, Prince Siddhartha, he led a life of bliss and contentment. At the age of 16, we're told, he was married to his cousin, Yasodhara, who was also 16. And I guess marrying within the clan was probably very much the standard thing that the royal families of that time in northern India did. The marriage would have been arranged, and that would have been the custom. Yasodhara, the wife, she was the daughter of a Koliya chief, and her mother was also a sister to King Suddhodana. And she had a sister called Devadatta who became a disciple of the Buddha, and then by some accounts became a dangerous rival. So The young prince was shielded from any miseries of life, any pain, any suffering. He was certainly kept away from any spiritual teachings by his father, and he lived a happy and blissful life within the palace compound, right up to, we're told, the age of 29. No experience outside the walls of his palaces. We're told he actually had 3 palaces, according to the season. Whether it was monsoon, whether it was dry season, he would relocate. So he reached the age of 29 completely oblivious to the realities of life, to the pain and suffering that ordinary people experience on the outside. But then something happened. One day, something changed. He was aware that there was life outside the palace walls, and the curiosity finally got the better of him. And young Prince Siddhartha convinced one of his assistants, a charioteer, to take him outside the palace wall on a series of rides throughout the countryside. And it was a shock to him. He saw things that he had never expected to see. We're told he saw an old, infirm, aged man. We're told he saw a sick person on the point of death lying in the streets. We're told he saw a corpse being carried to the burial ground. And these are things that he never knew about. He never knew that aspect of the human condition. And these stark realities, he suddenly realized that he'd been deceived, if you like, by his father. He had been sheltered from all these realities of life. And that came as a real blow to him, because in his mind, he was recognizing that any kind of life that pushed fundamental problems of existence to one side, pretended they weren't there, that kind of life wasn't worth living. And according to one ancient version of the Buddha's life, he said to himself these words. He said, "This is the end appointed to all creatures, and yet the world throws off all fear and is infatuated. Hard indeed must be the hearts of men who can be so self-composed." So Siddhartha at this stage has become deeply uncomfortable. He's realized that he's been living a bit of a lie all his life, that the reality of life is something different from what he has experienced up to now. And then finally, on the last trip out with his charioteer, he saw one more sight that gave him serious pause to think. And that was a wandering holy man, an ascetic, if you like, a sadhu or a shramana, who undertook spiritual practices such as meditation and yoga. And Siddhartha asked the charioteer about it. And the charioteer explained who these people were and how they spent their life. And at that point, Prince Siddhartha instinctively knew that he could no longer live in the palace. He had to leave, and he had to become an ascetic himself, a shramana. The description of this in that poem I talked about a little while ago, the Buddha Karita, it's a beautiful description. It goes like this. There he sat down on the ground covered with leaves and young grass bright with lapis lazuli, and meditating on the origin and destruction of the world, he laid hold of the path that leads to firmness of mind. And what that little verse is saying is not that he had gained the wisdom that he felt he needed to seek as yet. He had not been undertaking any spiritual practices to that point. But he had come to realize that a life devoted to spiritual practice was the most important thing, the most important way that he could live his life. And he determined then and there, he developed that firmness of mind that the verse refers to, that is the life that he would undertake from that moment on. So that's the first part of Siddhartha's life, leading to that groundbreaking decision within his own head that the spiritual life was the only life to be lived. So at that point, he returned to palace life for a short while, but something had changed, and he no longer took any pleasure in it. And then came the birth of his first son. His wife Yasodhara gave birth to the son. And when that happened, Siddhartha, instead of rejoicing, he wasn't happy at all. He was upset. He gave the child the name Rahula, which means a fetter, a barrier on the path to enlightenment. And the reason he was upset was that he understood that this child represented yet another reason why he should stay in his life of luxury and not pursue the spiritual life that he had decided was so important. The arrival of the new son was a barrier in the way of him doing that and made it far more difficult for him to do that. But his mind was made up. He had that. As the verse said, he had laid hold of the path that leads to firmness of mind. So on the same night of Rahula's birth, we're told, he wandered the palace alone after everyone had gone to sleep. He looked at all the luxuries that had once pleased him, and they all seemed grotesque at this stage. He had seen through them. He saw they weren't truly a part of real life. The musicians, the dancing girls that he was surrounded with all day had fallen asleep and were sprawled around. They were snoring and sputtering. And there's this young prince. He's reflecting on the old age, the disease, the death that would overtake all of these people and turn their bodies to dust. He realized that everything he was seeing was transient, was subject to change, and that change needed to be understood. So at that point, he really could no longer be content living the life of a prince. It was now a lie, all a lie as far as he was concerned. And that we're told that very night he left the palace. He shaved his head. He discarded his royal clothes and put on a beggar's robe. And he renounced all the luxury he had known. And from that moment on, he began his quest for enlightenment. So he's now out on his own, outside of the palace. He's turned his back on his entire family to follow the spiritual life. And he began by seeking out renowned teachers, because at that time in northern India, these teachers would have been very, very common. So he would have gravitated towards them to find out what it was they had to teach. And in the years that followed, he learned about many religious philosophies of his day. He moved from teacher to teacher, absorbing what they knew, what they had to tell, and he learned how to meditate deeply. But there came a point after he had come across all the teachers that he felt were worth studying under, and he realized that his doubts and his questions still remained. So he at that point left to find enlightenment by himself, and he didn't go alone. By that time, he had become part of a little group. It was himself and 5 other close disciples, and the 6 of them decided to go off on their own, to forsake any new teachers, but to try and find enlightenment by themselves. So over the next couple of years, they sought to find release from suffering, which was the end goal of the spiritual path, mostly through physical discipline. They became ascetics. They endured pain. There were breath practices, holding your breath. There was fasting till they were, their bones were all showing through. They were nearly starved. They were looking through the self-mortification to find a release to enlightenment, to spiritual enlightenment. And although they tried and tried, Siddhartha certainly, none of them. And our Prince Siddhartha still, he didn't achieve the spiritual breakthrough that he was seeking. So this went on for some time until they were on the point of death, we're told by the poem. And they were still essentially unenlightened. They were still essentially seeking. And at this point, it finally occurs to Siddhartha that in renouncing the pleasure he had enjoyed in his palace, what he had done was he had gone and grasped onto the opposite of pleasure, which is pain and self-mortification. It's starvation, it's sleeping out in the cold and the rain. He had gone from one extreme to another, and it finally occurred to him that this was not the right way to undertake a good spiritual practice. And at this point, he began to consider a middle way between the two extremes. And in considering that, he remembered an experience back from his childhood, when his mind had settled into a state of deep, deep peace, of deep meditation. And he saw in that moment, remembering this experience, he saw in that moment that the path of liberation actually came through the discipline of mind. And he realized that instead of starvation, instead of self-mortification, he needed to nourish his body back up to some kind of strength, and he needed to make an effort from that place to attain the enlightenment that he sought. So at that stage, we're told he accepted a bowl of rice milk from a young girl, and the scriptures go on to say that his 5 companions were furious because after all this effort they had put into bringing themselves to the point of death by starvation, all of a sudden one of their number was now enjoying good food, and they assumed that he had abandoned the quest. And so, assuming he had abandoned the quest, they then abandoned him. So now Siddhartha is on his own, and this is where the breakthrough happens. We're told that now alone he sat beneath a sacred fig tree, known ever after as the Bodhi tree. Bodhi is a Sanskrit word that means awakened or enlightened. And so because he was under this tree, it's called the Bodhi tree. This is where everything happened. And at that point, he settled into meditation. Just as an aside, I would mention that there is actually a Bodhi tree here in Trinidad, in the Queen's Park Savannah. It's on the edge of the savannah by the road. It's close to the St. Anne's roundabout, and it is actually said to be descended from the tree that Siddhartha sat under. I think it was a gift from a visiting dignitary from India years and years ago. Just in case you're ever curious. It looks very much like a large ficus tree. It's got this narrow pointed tip on its leaves. It's quite easy to locate, and as I say, it's close to the St. Anne's roundabout on the savannah. So Siddhartha sat beneath this tree, this Bodhi tree, and it is said by the scriptures that he made up his mind then and there that he would not get up until he had achieved the awakening that he was looking for. And it said that he went into a deep, deep form of meditation, and during the course of that meditation, many, many things happened to him. One of them was this struggle in his mind to penetrate to the deepest depths of knowledge, to understanding. And that struggle actually came to be mythologized. It became a myth in the Buddhist scriptures, and they had it as a great battle with a demon called Mara. And the demon, Mara means destruction, and it represents the passions that snare and delude us, essentially our own ignorance. It said that Mara brought vast armies of monsters to attack Siddhartha, who sat still and untouched. And then Mara sent his most beautiful daughter to try and seduce Siddhartha, but that effort also failed. So these really symbolize doubts and challenges in the mind. You know, why be sitting under the tree striving so hard when you could go off back to your good life? What was the point? We're told that finally Mara claims that the seat of enlightenment belongs to him and him alone, and his spiritual accomplishments were greater than Siddhartha's would ever be. And at that point, we're told Mara's army cries out together, "We are the witness to the truth of his words." And then we're told Mara turns to Siddhartha and says, "Well, who speaks for you? You're all alone." And the scriptures tell us at that point, Siddhartha reaches out his right hand and he touches the earth. And the earth itself roars, "I bear you witness." And at that point, Siddhartha triumphs over Mara. It's actually a feature of many Buddhist statues that you might see. The next time you see a Buddhist statue, uh, look at the pose of the Buddha. Often you will see that his right hand is actually reaching down. He's in meditation, but his right hand is reaching down off his knee and touching the ground. And this is the famous earth witness pose that we're describing here. So we're told as the morning star rose in the sky, Siddhartha Gautama, he realized full enlightenment. And at that point, he became what we call a Buddha, a fully enlightened one. And he was 35 years old at the time. So the name Buddha itself means one who has achieved fully enlightenment. And we're told that there have actually been many Buddhas in the past, and there will be many in the future. So, although when we speak the word Buddha, we are talking about a historical person who lived 2,500 years ago, whose name was Siddhartha Gautama, it's actually a term that can be applied to all enlightened ones throughout the reaches of time. But to return to Siddhartha, after his enlightenment, we're told he spent a full 7 days in the bliss of the state that he had reached. And then he spent a further month very close to this Bodhi tree that he became enlightened under, trying to decide in his head what the next step should be. As a fully enlightened being now, he was fully capable of going off into deep samadhi, deep meditation, and enjoying the bliss of what he had attained frankly for the rest of his life. But there were other concerns in his mind, and the chief concern that he had was how is it he was going to convey what he had discovered to other people. He realized that his work in front of him now was not just to go off in happy bliss, but to try and communicate what he had learned to others. He had learned, for example, that only through mental discipline and clarity of mind would delusions fall away and allow a trainee to experience that great reality he had experienced. So that listeners without the direct experience would forever be stuck in concepts and would misunderstand everything he said. So he knew he would be talking to people who could not grasp what he was trying to convey. And he spent some time thinking about how he needed to structure his teaching so that he could reach these people and get them to the point where they were no longer stuck in concepts and would begin to understand what he was saying. It was the compassion of his own understanding that persuaded him to make that attempt to transmit what he had realized. So the scriptures again tell us that after his enlightenment, he went to the deer park in Isipatana, which is actually where most of his famous sermons are delivered, according to the scriptures. And that is located in what is now Uttar Pradesh in northern India. And in going there, he reconnected with the 5 companions who had abandoned him earlier, and we're told that he preached his first sermon to them. The sermon has been preserved through the scriptures. It's called the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and it centers on the key teachings of the 4 Noble Truths, which I am sure has been covered in a previous talk on this program. So what he was doing there, instead of teaching doctrines about enlightenment, which made no sense because the people he was preaching that to would not understand, he chose instead to prescribe a path of practice through which people could get there themselves, could realize that enlightenment for themselves. So that is how he began. We're told then that over the next 45 years, he devoted himself to teaching. He traveled throughout northern India, and he attracted thousands of followers, what we call the Sangha. It became a big spiritual movement in northern India. And eventually, even his family that he had turned his back on came into his Sangha. He reconciled with his father, who, as you remember, was King Suddhodana. He reconciled with his wife, who he had left, the devoted Yasodhara. Became a nun and disciple. His son Rahula became a novice monk at the age of 7 and spent the rest of his life with his father. And the Sangha grew and grew and grew. And the Buddha's fame spread far and wide. People started carrying his teachings beyond India into other countries. So finally, at the age of 80, he died, or he entered what we call parinirvana, where he left the physical body behind. And with his passing, he abandoned what Buddhists consider to be the endless cycle of death and rebirth that all beings except Buddhas are bound to. So the key attainment of a Buddha, except for the fact that they've become fully enlightened, in their enlightenment, they actually break the bonds that bind us to the constant cycle of death and rebirth. And before his last breaths, he spoke these final words to his followers. He said, "Behold, O monks, this is my last advice to you. All compounded things in the world are changeable. They are not lasting. Work hard to gain your own salvation." So this is a very deceptive little thing, little statement. It may sound straightforward, but it actually contains the totality of the Buddha's teachings in a single sentence. But to grasp it, you really have to meditate on it for a long time. Let me read it again. "Behold, O monks, this is my last advice to you. All compounded things in the world are changeable. They're not lasting. Work hard to gain your own salvation." What he was saying there, he's saying that all things are inherently empty. They have no permanence, they have no lasting quality. And because of that, there is nothing to grasp, nothing to hold on to. And if you look at your own life, if all of us are grasping, that is what the ego gives us. We are forever chasing after some things and running away from other things. But he is saying everything is empty. There's nothing to grasp, nothing to hold on to. Even he himself, even his own teachings, he says, work hard to gain your own salvation. And what he's saying there is the teachings are just a guide. They're to help you along your own path. And you need to understand them and discover your own life's reality by yourself. Only by your own effort can you get to begin to discover what he had discovered. So, as he says, I am the finger pointing to the moon. And that basically means the thing is the moon itself, not the finger. Don't get caught up in the finger. Um, put a little more crudely, um, some great spiritual teacher through the years has said that the Buddha's enlightenment solved his problem. And it's true. It did solve his problem. He left behind teachings, but to grasp those teachings, we have to do the work ourselves. So, after his death, his body was cremated, and actually, we're told his remains are existing to this day. They are placed in what we call stupas, which are like shrines, dome structures. They're common throughout the Buddhist world. Many places like China, Burma, Sri Lanka, um, we're told they contain relics of the Buddha. So, to bring it forward to the present time, in our present date, we are now 2,500 years on from when this history that I've been relating happened. And 2,500 years later, the teachings, they still remain very significant for many people throughout the world. There are new followers that are coming to Buddhism every day, and it is one of the world's most important religions, one of the world's great religions. But many, myself even, don't view it as a religion, but as a spiritual path. It's a philosophy of life, it's a spiritual path. And I hesitate to use the word religion for it. Today, we're told there are an estimated 350 to 550 million people who practice some form of Buddhism today, particularly throughout Southeast Asia. So, as I wrap up this talk on Prince Siddhartha's life, the Buddha's life, let me end on a point I made at the beginning, because it's really, really important. This person, Siddhartha Gautama, he was a man. He was not a god. He was a special man, absolutely, but just a man. And the teachings that he gave weren't divine teachings. They were simply reflecting his own understanding, what he himself had realized through deep, deep, deep meditation. And certainly not divine scriptures that we're meant to take on faith. We're actually meant to listen to them and discover for ourselves whether they're true or not. So the reason I said I don't consider Buddhism to be a true religion, if you want to use that word, is those facts that I've just told you, and that separates Buddhism from other religions or faiths. The Buddha was not a divine, supernatural being. He did not give divine teachings that we have to take on faith. I'm not trying to drag down religions, absolutely not. But I'm making the point that with Buddhism, no gods, no beliefs, no one sitting in judgment. It is more like a moral philosophy of life, if you want to put it that way. And because of that, there's actually no reason why listening to Buddhist teachings or trying to put them into practice and see whether they're true for you can't happen alongside whatever faith you might hold on to or whatever religion you practice. The Buddhist teachings are entirely concerned with bringing peace, happiness, and wisdom to ourselves, and to reducing suffering both for ourselves and others. So, the path is well laid out through the Buddhist scriptures, and the work to be done, as I've said several times, is entirely internal. It's all about helping us to see the world as it actually is, and to help us to reduce our own ego clinging by cultivating loving kindness and compassion towards both ourselves and others. And the fruit of these efforts comes quickly. We become more happy, we become more content with what we have, we become more concerned with the needs of others, more aware of the realities of life, less afraid of what life might throw at us. It's a path to a good life, and it's a path that anyone can practice, no matter what spiritual tradition they may hold to. Yes, full enlightenment remains elusive to most of us, um, but it is the end of this path, and it is attainable. And the life of Siddhartha Gautama shows us how that can happen and all the good that arises from it. So it's 11:45, and that's where I plan to stop. So I'm going to leave it there for today, and hopefully there might be a question or two that I can answer. So I'll wrap up. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Graham, for sharing the enlightenment with us this morning. And I do wish you a good day and, of course, a good week as well. So thank you very much for exploring Buddhist concepts.
Thank you, Sir Charles. It was very nice to be here, and I look forward to being here in the future again.
Thank you
Goodbye,
so much.
listeners.
All right, people, this has been Exploring Buddhist Concepts right here on New Era TT Radio.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be happy. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be happy. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease.